Welcome to Fully Engaged with Jennifer N. Sutherland, where we explore thoughtful conversations about navigating the intricate world of leadership, learning, and organizational development.
Hi, Lindsay Lee. Thank you so much for joining us today. Let me do a brief introduction so everybody knows who we're talking to today. So with over a decade of experience as both a subject matter expert and facilitator of leadership, new leadership and graduate programs for Australia's leading corporations, Lindsay develops comprehensive learning solutions that transform organizations from program content to internal facilitator capability. A recognized LinkedIn top voice in mentoring and founder of the Learning and Development Collective, Lindsay is a dynamic trainer, speaker, and consultant who specializes in elevating emerging leaders and first-time leaders. So Lindsay, welcome to Fully Engaged.
That makes me sound very fancy. Thank you so much, Jennifer. I'm so excited to be here.
So glad that you are part of the group here. Your sort of introduction as a top voice in mentoring was one of the first things that sort of got my attention about you. And then the L&D Collective is super exciting. So we're going to spend a little bit of time talking about that as well. But I always like to start the podcast with one question. What does fully engaged mean to you?
100% presence, no distractions.
I love that. And that is in work life, personal life, everywhere we're at, focusing on whatever's going and being fully present. I love that.
Absolutely. And even just in ourselves too. I mean, we're so constantly focused on the external, but even just being present with ourselves is something that I feel like we could do more of.
I love that. How would you describe workplace culture? That's sort of our general topic. So how would you describe workplace culture? And then share with us a great example that you've seen or heard about or related to workplace culture.
Yeah. Workplace culture is an elusive beast, and it really is something that changes from moment to moment, day to day, even though it can have overarching themes. And when companies get big enough, it's not even necessarily led from the top of the company. It's based on who's around the most and who has the most influence and a myriad of other factors too. So workplace culture is something that can really make or break a company and someone's experience there personally and professionally too. And it's such an important thing. And it's something that we each have responsibility in creating, no matter what we choose to create. What good workplace culture is for me is completely different to what it will be for you, Jennifer, and the next person and your listeners today as well. So a good workplace culture from my perspective, personally speaking, is one where I can be myself, where I can come and bring all of me, the good, the bad, and the ugly, and feel comfortable to take risks and try uncomfortable things and be innovative. But that's very much a reflection on me and my values, and what will be a good workplace culture for yourself will be totally different.
I think that's great. I have a coworker who did a work assessment 10, 15 years ago in his career and basically identified 2 or 3 things that are sort of deal breakers for him. We all know him like personal relationships, romantic relationships, but work relationships. He identified one of his key things is the person he works for. He has to have respect for, he has to appreciate their vision, and it's like a deal breaker for him. So if he was working for an organization that the leader changed, he had to consider, is this new leader somebody that I'm going to be comfortable with, that I trust, that I respect, that I'm going to follow their vision? And I just thought that was a really cool approach to have sort of these deal breakers because it is different for all of us. And it's could be about flexibility for somebody and it could be about career progression for somebody else, or somebody wants all of those things and they're not going to deviate. So I think that that's great to think it is different for everybody. And I love asking that question because it gives me insight into every guest that we have. So thank you for sharing that. It kind of leads me to think about the Learning and Development Collective. So what inspired you to start that? And how are you sort of sharing advice and news and insights with over 700 professionals, probably more now, but at least 700 professionals in the L&D space?
So I started the Learning and Development Collective during COVID, actually. So I had my leadership development company, and it was in talking to my clients in L&D where they were asking me, what's other people doing in L&D? Are they being made redundant? What are people's budgets like? How are they overcoming remote workforces? What's the company culture like at the moment? And I thought, I can just pass along messages, or what if I got you all in a Zoom room and you can talk amongst yourselves? So we did that a couple of weeks later, and we had 12 members to begin with. Now we have over 750, which is phenomenal. I cannot get my head around that. And it really started as that peer-to-peer support network that I just purely facilitated. And we still have that as a core. So it's L&D professionals who are employed sharing their insights about their role in their business with others in the spirit of helping and supporting and lifting the industry up. It's crazy. And so from that, we started a bunch of other things that they were asking for. For example, L&D professionals often think about lots of other, everyone else's L&D, but not their own. Like, what about their own professional developments? It's something that they often don't think about. It's almost like, how they say a builder's house is always the one that needs the most work. So L&D professionals tend to not think about their own learning. And if they do, they don't prioritize it necessarily outside of what you can get for free online or just around the office as well. So we started a subscription and we started regular events. But what we did initially before any of that, after the original group was formed, was ran the first L&D conference in the metaverse, because that's what they would like to do. They would like to do some PD, and they'd never, at that point in time, most of them had not been in the metaverse before. It was still a new thing. What is this new beast that's coming up in the world? Before AI was a serious conversation. So we did that with 120 attendees. I didn't even know what the metaverse was when they brought it up to me at first. I just said, yes, okay, great, let's do that. But on the inside, I'm like, is that not a video game? Like, how am I going to run a conference in a video game that my stepkids play? I don't know. So we did it. We had a keynote speaker from Deloitte, and we had 4 breakout rooms on various topics where people were happy to come and speak and be part of this new thing. And it was a lot of fun. And from there, we've just continued to build and develop what people in the forum, which is the original group, have been asking for. And we now do industry reports and all sorts of things. So there's not one answer in terms of how we share that knowledge and skills. We approach things from a personalized avenue as much as we possibly can.
I love that. And there's nothing like getting professionals together that understand each other's worlds. Like, to me, I can talk to a lot of people about my job, but talking to somebody else in L&D is just phenomenal. You just connecting with people that are passionate but truly understand the challenges or the things that you're working through and have an idea of what sort of the new trends are. I love that. And for a group to have each other, I can imagine those original 12, 13 people are probably really tight at this point, because it's been almost 5 years probably.
Yeah, for some, I think so we've just had our 3rd birthday, actually. So it was 2021. So we had our 3rd birthday in September that just went, coming up for our 4th one. And there's original 12 every time we get in the forum session, whenever they're there, because not everybody can come every time. Whenever they're there, it's like, let us know if you're a newbie, an OG, or an OG, which is the originals. And there's always somebody there who came from that original group, which is really lovely.
I love that. So in your introduction, I talked about how you are a top voice in mentoring on LinkedIn, which is not easy to be a top voice in something. So tell me a little bit about what maybe trends you're seeing related to mentoring, but also how does that relate to leadership and learning?
Yes. So within mentoring itself, it's something that a lot of people would love to do, but it's not always something that is pulled off successfully. What execution and success looks like is such an individual experience for mentors and mentees, and then trying to find that mix is really unique. So the trend at the moment within, or according to the industry report, not just within mentoring, but within L&D focusing for 2025, is very much around personalized learning journeys. How can we create experiences and skills development and opportunities for behavior change where we are creating a personalized, not just career progression path, but also a personalized experience. So if you and I are in the same event, for example, or the same training program, how can you take what you need from it and I take what I need from it as well, even within the same parameters? So mentoring has become a bigger part of that as well, which is really exciting and interesting. And so then it's about setting the parameters really clearly for everybody who is part of that, so that they know what's expected, and also what, if they're willing to do that at the beginning, and carry that all the way through, because the way people show up for mentoring will absolutely dictate the experience for both parties, because there's pros and cons for being a mentor and a mentee. So it's something that you need to opt into, and you can benefit from mentoring, including from being a mentor, including being reverse mentored in different things too. The up and coming generations know so much about the emerging tech world that can be a bit daunting, or that we get stuck in the day-to-day BAU, and we're not thinking about what's coming down the pipeline. Reverse mentoring in a program is something that can be super beneficial, particularly in this day and age where things just move so quickly.
I love that. And when I think about that mentoring career journey, that personal journey that you mentioned, 25, 30 years ago when I started my career, I'm like, I went to my first conference and there were tracks for the
Yeah.
conference. I just thought, well, that's brilliant because, I might be emerging in my career, or I might have to focus on learning technology, or I just want to pay attention to the data analytics side of things. So all of us can get some general knowledge, but when you have a specific question in your mind that you are trying to get an answer to, having that personalized learning journey is so critical. And I've seen mentoring programs that are very informal and then very formal. But the ones that I've seen most successful are exactly what you said, where somebody can basically find what they need and it's not so directive and so like sort of strict and narrow that people lose the insight that they might be looking for they have a little bit more option there. So I think that that's a great insight to share.
Absolutely. And then beyond that, too, a sense of belonging is so important for us as humans beyond mentoring in just life in general. If you really capture that within a mentor-mentee experience, it doesn't really matter what you give them because they're going to get what they need out of it anyway. So just providing that space so that they feel safe to feel like they can belong or start that journey will just change everything.
I love that. I'm in the process of formalizing a sort of first time leadership onboarding program at my employer and kind of incorporating things that are sort of off the shelf training, things like communication styles, things like, remote leadership and things along those lines, but then also adding in our sort of corporate expectations and leadership principles, if you will. Things like, having one on ones and doing skip levels, things like that. What are some of the maybe blind spots you've seen or heard when people think about what new managers should learn or how can they be most successful?
The biggest one I see is the thought process, even if not consciously, that they need to know everything, drink from the fire hydrant style. And a new manager, someone who's just stepping into leadership for the first time or the first time within your company, is in essence, to put it blatantly, a high risk time for them. That's when you're likely to lose them as a team member from your company entirely. So ensure that they feel supported and safe and not like the world is on their shoulders, whilst they not only learn the new skills that they didn't know they needed and become, competently, unconsciously competent at these things, and it can become usual day to day for them, but also being aware and supporting them that they are evolving their identity very likely, 9 times out of 10, from just a team member to someone who's responsible for certain things. And that regularly requires that identity evolution. And that in itself, person to person, it requires support and love and TLC. And so overloading them with processes and checklists, and you need to do this and you need to reprimand a team member if they're doing that, as opposed to supporting, uplifting, transformational leadership style, can really make a difference. And that is a massive gap that I see regularly. People are really cluing on to a new manager or a first time manager or first time leader even, and needing to transition, just starting to transition from self leadership to leading of others. They're really clued on to that, which maybe 2 or 3 years ago, whilst it's a fundamental piece, is not the language and the vernacular that we were using in the industry. It was more around making sure they had certain topics covered. And we've slowly started making this transition. I think the next horizon for us as an industry will be supporting that identity transition without getting into their personal business if they don't want to, supporting that fundamentally, and then allowing for that growth and for them to take on the parts of the leadership role and develop the parts of the leadership role that they would like to emphasize. For myself, it's always collaboration. But for you, Jennifer, it might be something totally different. So allowing them to grow into that and supporting them, they'll stay long term, then almost guarantee it.
I think that's so insightful because I've seen so many people get promoted into leadership that sort of do it reluctantly because maybe they're really good at their job, or maybe their leader was gone and now they want to replace with somebody that was already from that team.
Yes.
And thinking of that psychological safety is so critical because sometimes a company is just like, we need you in this role, and that
Yes.
person will step into it. I have a friend who has turned down at least 4 or 5 promotions, and finally she was like, "If I do it again, they're probably gonna get rid of me because they really want me in a leadership role." So she kinda walked into it reluctantly, but knowing it wasn't going to be the most fun thing for her, but the company set her up for success, and I think that that is so critical. Um, when somebody's sort of that reluctant leader and jumping in, um, I think you really identified a really interesting part there related to that personal approach, that identity side of things. Um, I know I've seen it too, and I'm sure you have when somebody moves from peer to leader. That's especially a tricky spot to be, "Hey, you and I used to, like, joke about things, and now I have to think things differently through the corporate environment and sort of approach things
Yes.
differently."
And redefine the way we interact. They call it the mate to manager transition. It's particularly risky for companies to do it that way. And unfortunately, so many companies are in the position where they're like, okay, well, this leader is left or this leader's been promoted and now we've got this gap to fill. So which one out of the team do we think will handle this the best or do this the best? It's not necessarily thinking about it as much as we'd love to. We can't do all things in L&D because we're often tiny teams running on the
Right.
smell of an oily rag. We often have to support someone who happen to be the best for the job as opposed to someone who this really fits and suits and that's ready for it, and supporting them in that journey and that made to manager transition is just so critical for so many reasons.
Definitely. Like, thinking about leadership development programs that you've worked on specifically, has there been a particularly, I don't know, challenging one that you can kind of talk about what obstacles you overcame and how you did that?
Yes, I would say the biggest challenge that there always is, and this isn't one particular instance, this is sometimes uh, a myriad of instances which I hear from other leadership development professionals as well, when they don't in the company have a self nomination process and someone is put into a leadership development program and it's either not communicated with them that this is actually a good thing. And for some reason, it may be seen as a punishment to have to go through this program. Those individuals, you can almost always pick them when they come in the room because there's this level of discomfort and level of prove to me what you can teach me because I don't think I should be here. And that's always challenging, not just as a facilitator, but as someone who, for example, if it's an internal facilitator, someone on the L&D team who's running the programs, this is often, while they're not in the same department, someone that is a peer in so many different ways. And maneuvering on the fly in front of, it could be 10 people who are so happy to be there and the one person that is not necessarily thinking they need to be. This is a huge challenge for people and it requires adaptability and flexibility and a lot of confidence. It's hard to get up and present to people. It's hard to get up and train. And then to do that with an outcome in mind, with someone in the room who's like, I think, prove what you're worth kind of thing. Prove to me why I should be here. Can be tricky, absolutely, and can rock your confidence a little bit, which can have flow through effects for the leadership development program as a whole. So, getting those people on side really fast in using whatever skills you need to in that moment. My best recommendation, and it is a generalization because there's no one size fits all, the best recommendation I have for people, for facilitators, whether internal or external, in that is either if you can, give that person the opportunity to take ownership. And even if they need to, give the person the opportunity to rebuttal something you've said in front of everybody. And if you've got any coaching skills, I'm a qualified coach, you could actually work with them in that space if they've given you permission without, they don't necessarily have to use those words, but you'll know, given you permission, work through it with them. And then you can bring everybody back on that journey together as well. Doing it that way, where they feel loved and supported and opt in front of people, will support everybody in the room too, because they can feel it and they can sense it as well. Because it's, for someone as even if you want to be there, you're walking into a space sometimes with peers that maybe you feel are a little bit competitive, or maybe you've never been to a program before, and we're all sitting in that space of, as amazing as this might be, I still feel uncertain in some ways or scared, like an imposter. And so having that work done with everybody is actually really supportive and collaborative for the whole room to feel comfortable to move forward together, because you are creating an environment of transformation for people, even if it's just skills and something simple like I say simple like communication, but something like communication where we all do it in different programs in different ways. that will support the overall outcome. And then you'll be more likely as a facilitator to achieve the notes and the data and the development that you are required to achieve as a result of the program.
I love that you mentioned imposter syndrome specifically and sort of the maybe internal competitiveness, even though it might not be overt, but there's sometimes some of that, below the surface. I was in sales for 10 years, and you put salespeople in a training together, and there's suddenly role plays or case studies, and that competitiveness comes out, but that nervousness that, are they going to realize that maybe I shouldn't be in this role? Or why am I in this training? So I think your approach is really spot on because I've seen that done really effectively when it comes to facilitating a discussion and a conversation and just sort of recognizing the challenge to have in that room. And you specifically mentioned, if you're an internal facilitator, that's even really kind of awkward because these are coworkers. But in your recent newsletter, you talked about the emerging leader bundle for L&D and how one of the key notices in there is that success factor when it comes to training, learning, and development is having an external facilitator or a consultant come in. What else sort of came out of that you could share?
So having an external facilitator can be really useful because as an internal, you're focusing on 99,000 things and you're often in the teacup and you can't see what's printed on the outside, as they say. Having somebody come in who just does that can be really beneficial. The most beneficial thing I've had people say to me from that is the focus on the pre-planning. We as L&D love creating often is focusing on that and love to put all the topics together. And so that's often where we start. And sometimes it's because that's the passion of what we do. Sometimes it's because that's what, top down are pushing for us. What are you actually going to teach them in here? But that is in so many ways the smallest part of the success of the program. The pre-planning needs to take up the majority of the time, and then depending on the program and the way it's structured, the delivery. Because in the pre-planning, you're not only setting the adaptability foundations, which are required in this era. You cannot do a one and done set style. It needs to be able to adapt, particularly with personalized learning journeys, making such an uprising in 2025. It is also where you get your stakeholder buy-in. It's also where you make sure that people are interested to attend and the environment within, you've got time to prep that, the culture of the workplace as well, even if you're putting something in place for the first time. And everyone has said to you in the past, and I know there's so many people who will relate to this, everyone said to you in the past, yeah, we love learning within this business. And then you actually try and offer something and they're like, no, I'm busy. And then it hasn't worked for some reason. It's like the yes, we want learning, but no, we won't follow through with it type scenarios. So many L&D professionals wish that wasn't the case, but is. This pre-prepared area, so this preparing for the program, the pre-launch almost, is going to support you to overcome that. And then once you've got the gaps of where everyone is, where everybody needs to be, and everyone's on board who needs to be, and the potential people who may be in this program are eager and buzzing for it, then you can start to look at the topics and the content will honestly build itself because you need to know to begin with if you're developing skills, if you're changing behavior, or if this really is just they don't know and they just need to know something. It'll just easily build itself from there, but you have to do that legwork beforehand. I think that's the most beneficial thing that I've heard as a result of the bundle. And externals can support you with that very much because, as I said, it's very hard to sometimes see the outside of your teacup and read the label while you're in it.
I love that phrase. I've never heard that before. That might be regional, but I might steal that from you. I also might steal, what did you say? The unconscious competence. I love
Yes.
that phrase. Also stealing that from you, so thank you for that.
Well,
Um, so I was thinking about the idea of like the external facilitator and internal facilitator. Both approaches definitely require what you were talking about, the that sort of initial conversation, understanding what the goal is. I know early in my career, I was really impressed. I had a coworker who had a very robust sort of intake process related to training, and I have taken that and run with that the rest of my career. It's been fantastic. Having those questions of who needs to know this, who's the audience, but also what is their mindset towards learning this? Are they going to be eager? Are they nervous? I once worked for in the US a health insurance company right when healthcare reform was kind of kicking in. And there was so much change for people who have been doing the same thing for the longest time. And suddenly, this government mandate changed everything. And so I was, okay, what's the approach going to be? How are people going to react to this? And so to me, that intake is so important. I teach, and I'm an adjunct professor and I teach learning and development courses for undergraduate and graduate. And we spend an intense amount of time talking about just even the needs assessment. And it could be formal, it could be informal, but that is so critical. Don't just take an order from somebody. Learn what is that skill gap. And as you said, it might be a skill, it might be a change in behavior, it might be a communication, right? It just might be, let's share with you how to do that. So I think that that approach is so fantastic, and I love that the people have taken advantage of the bundle, actually understand that and have got that benefit from doing it that way. I personally work for a cybersecurity company right now. I have worked for other companies that have various technical skills. Cybersecurity is probably one of the highest level technical skills that I have been responsible for training. How do you balance teaching technical skills with things like emotional intelligence, or some people call them soft skills still, but the universal skills, the people skills? How do you sort of balance that for people that maybe are highly technical or just need to know those technical skills?
Yes, it has, and that was one of my biggest challenges when I first begun because I'm such a people skill orientated person, and I do not necessarily or did not definitely have the technical mindset that a lot of engineers, people in IT, professional services, IT tend to naturally gravitate towards. So within the people skills, and then I'll talk about technical, but within the people skills, facilitating training, teaching that in a way which spoke to the technical mind so that it wasn't so polarized, so different, so that it was a nice, even balance of uh, not just energy within the program, but also experience within the program as well for someone was my first challenge because you can talk emotional intelligence to death if it's not done in a way, for example, that someone who's more technical and analytically minded is willing to hear. And you can lead a horse to water, but you can't make it drink, as they say. I'm full of sayings. But when it comes to teaching technical and people skills, if you've done that with your people skills to begin with, it won't matter if you are blending those two things together. And if you've done your pre-program planning really well, you often find, more often than not, that you can, for example, if you need to increase the level of confidence within your team members to have low-level communications around workplace incivility on a low level, for example, standing, you can sometimes actually blend that with your technical skills in some way, shape, or form. People don't necessarily have to be overtly aware of exactly what you're teaching them at any given moment. So if you blend those two things the right way, for example, it could be, let's use Excel. Again, my super technical mind coming out right there. But Excel, for example, you can actually use Excel, for example, as a tool and vice versa to do those two things at once. It's very rare that I have run a program or developed a program where we've got two two subjects going at different times, for example, technical and then people. More often than not, it's all done together, and we may break if it's a day, for example, or if it's done in modules, sorry, over a period of time. We may talk about how by the end of today, you're going to feel an increase in confidence and you will see your ability to tackle low-level communications and workplace incivility in the workplace. You'll notice you feel more comfortable to do it, and in 3 months, 6 months, whatever it is, you'll notice you're doing it when you need to, as opposed to whatever the alternative was within the business. And at the same time, at the end of this session, you'll also find that you have the increased ability to X, or you also have a better understanding of this software too. You can actually blend those things really well. Typically speaking, if you're keeping them separate, sometimes you do need to, if you're keeping them separate, there's a gap which still needs to be filled, or a bridge that still needs to be made between the gap and where we're heading to and the outcomes. If we need to, we may assess the data on it. Okay, so what's their proficiency at this software, and what's their ability to calculate this, or achieve this level of customer service on a regular basis. You may still monitor and analyze the data and report back and feed that back to the business on that level, but the input for the person that's actually in the room will seem really seamless within those skills. And it is a natural evolution and transformation that they may not even notice, because it's like watching grass grow until you ask them again at the end or assess them again at the end and they get a look for that. So that's a very long-winded answer saying just blend it all together.
I love it. I love it. I know one of the key trainings that I have been asked to do is exactly what you mentioned, sort of blend that. It's more
Mm.
of how do technical people communicate effectively to non-technical people. So we're still talking about they're still going to have to learn the technical product knowledge components, but how do they translate and communicate that to somebody who maybe isn't as technical, maybe the end customer or somebody who has to implement it, some type of thing. And it is a really interesting conversation when you can balance those things together and sort of create that flexible approach.
Yeah.
So it doesn't feel as hard, right? You're not learning just this or just this. It's because it's more related and realistic for their actual job. It's really going to implement how it's going to look in the real world, basically.
Absolutely. And if you're running, for example, a program that has got both technical and both people skills within it as two separate things, and say you've chosen to keep it that way, what tends to happen is the sense of belonging will be stronger in some of the topics if people are acutely aware of it than others. And they will lean into naturally, as we do as humans, to things that makes them more comfortable. And so you miss the opportunity to completely develop on that level that you could have if they're feeling more comfortable in one topic than the other, as opposed to treating it like an entire experience.
So, thinking about leadership development, training in general, one of my favorite components, which has gotten a lot of attention probably in the past 5, maybe 7 years or so, is storytelling. And I think TED Talks has really helped with that. People have learned that, that approach really just is strong and impactful. How do you think storytelling sort of fits in with leadership development and just training in general?
Yes, actually, that's really interesting. So, I am, as a volunteer, the national lead for an association here in Australia called Professional Speakers Australia. And within that, our members are trainers, speakers, leadership development experts, sometimes as well, externally based, and then they go in and do these sorts of things. And one of our members in our local members here is an expert in storytelling, and I have just learned so much from her from storytelling, because it's not something that naturally comes to me, or something that I find really easy to do. It's not a natural skill set. And adding that into different components that either I'm working on directly or that I'm developing with internals so they can do it, has been not only a lot of fun, but also really good for personal development within that. So storytelling has got that ability to not only take people out of the moment and bring them into the story, but also transfer something subconsciously or unconsciously, which will either sit or simmer and then be useful for them in what you're going to do next. So I know there's so many more benefits than that, but that's what I found really useful myself, the ability to share and build that empathy. And it might not be a personal story, it might be a story from someone in the room who's sharing spontaneously because you've set the scene correctly for them to be able to do it. And then you take that story and contextualize it in a certain way and feed it back to everybody so they're primed and ready for whatever comes next or another part of the program. And they're able to use what they learned, even if unconsciously within that, to better their own development within it. It's a phenomenal experience and it's a lot of fun. And I'm actually going to an event in a couple of days where we're going to do some more development on storytelling. And I'm attending as a learner, so I'm looking forward to that very, very much. It's like a endless topic that you can look into.
Yeah, I love that idea. And as a speaker, having, I don't know, 5 to 7 stories that you can like use depending on the topic, depending on the audience, but being able to have those sort of at your fingertips, especially people that are interested in being professional speakers or, at conferences and keynotes and things like that, to have that sort of story ready to go. And I
Yes.
love that you can weave those stories throughout. So it's not just getting their interest in the very beginning, but like you said, introducing the next topic or concept and using it to kind of pull things through. And then at the end, kind of tying it all together so that they can recognize themselves in that story, even though it wasn't about them initially. I think that that is so brilliant. I'm so excited for your experience to go to that event, and I'm sure you're going to come up with a whole bunch of new ideas that you can use in future trainings and things.
Absolutely.
I love it. I love it. So when we think about this podcast is called Fully Engaged, and I am just a huge advocate for the employee experience in general. When you think about employee engagement and leadership development and leaders in general, where do you think that sort of intersection is? And how do you think that that ties into like corporate culture?
Mm. Self-responsibility is definitely something that I feel is the basis of a lot of things that we do as humans, particularly in leadership development, particularly in the workplace as well. The reason being, we are often, it's easy for us as humans to feel like we are just going with the flow and riding the waves and being pushed around by the winds of the time, whatever that means for you in that particular moment. And without that level of responsibility, I think Jocko Willink says it the best. Without that level of responsibility of self, it's really easy to just drift and float and feel like when something happens in the workplace or the culture isn't exactly the way that you would like it, perhaps it's grating and maybe there's a bit of friction for you for whatever reason, with an extra level of self responsibility. Like, what can I do? How can I make an impact? Even just for me, we can just pick up and leave, or we can perhaps create a culture around us, a little microculture around us in the workplace, which is not in alignment with the way we'd like to show up in the world. So taking that level of accountability of self, the accountability of what we're putting out there, but also for our own emotions and understanding that they are just part of the human experience and they're not necessarily the thing that is our defining factor, and how we feel on one day may just be how we feel on that day. It doesn't need to have justification or reason. It's okay. Knowing that, accepting that, taking responsibility for that, and then choosing how you show up without changing who you are in any way, shape, or form. Choosing how you show up on a day-to-day basis and having that level of responsibility can make such an impact in workplace culture, because it's often the loudest or the biggest energy in the room which can set the culture, even if it's just an open workplace, for example. Let's take tiers of leadership out of it for a moment. Even just in an open workplace, the person with the biggest impact will be the person that's literally the loudest, or smiles the most, makes people have the most emotions one way or the other. You want to make sure what you're doing is a good one and that you have complete responsibility for, and that will make an impact in culture as well.
I think that is such a great example of that is even, when you're all physically together in one place, that the dynamics of that is really interesting. I know for me, from a leadership perspective, when I had a team that I was leading and we were in person and we were going into an office regularly, I thrived, right? I really enjoyed, like, we would do silly things at lunch. I would pop up a video at, like, like an old classic TV show in, like, the conference room, and we'd eat lunch together. And when we all went remote, that was hard to translate to and convert that in trying to find new ways of doing that. But that idea of the emotional intelligence and employee engagement related to leadership, I think is such an amazing connection. And as leaders, it's our responsibility to make sure that it is tying into the employee experience and helping them really feel connected to the organization and their work and understand what their work is. Um, I've got two more questions for you. So, you've had a fantastic career in L&D. What have you seen as, like, sort of the trends or the sort of the key things that you've noted related to leadership development and how it's evolved?
Yes. So it's a very good question because there's 99,000 things I could say. The evolution, I believe, of emphasis on the individual leaders as opposed to emphasis on what the company wants the leaders to be. It's almost a flip. Back in the day, and some businesses, it's unfortunately still true, but we are moving towards the more individualized approach. Back in the day, as I say, the company would decide, okay, so a leader has these things, and these are the people that will get promoted. And if a leader doesn't fit this mold, then so be it. And we'll develop in alignment with that. And some businesses didn't even necessarily have that development piece. They were just like, okay, so you're a leader now, we expect these things from you. where the emphasis is now on the individual and how would you like to show up and how can we support you and keep you engaged with our company because we see the value and the investment in you as well. Still not perfect, but in my time, it has been a massive transition. And in my personal opinion, humble opinion, it is the thing that is making such a big difference to people's lives because we don't end when we walk out the office door. We go home and we have an entire life. And if we're bringing work home with us, even if it's just the home office door, if we're bringing work home with us, then we are giving airtime to things in our life which aren't necessarily helping us be a balanced and well-rounded person, particularly if it's a negative airtime, if we're being kept up at night and those sorts of things. So knowing that we as individuals have that ability, whether it's in self-leadership, whether it's in leading others, or whether it's leading an organization, we have the ability to lead on a day-to-day basis in and outside of the workplace by the way we choose to show up in the world, even on our worst days, if there is such a thing. We have a whole new lease on life that way. So when it comes to developing leaders, that in particular, that evolution from my perspective is just chef's kiss.
Yeah, there's a quote that I won't remember the exact words that says something basically like, being a leader is not based on your title. It's how you show up, it's how you influence, it's how you have an effect on those around you. So having that ability to bring all of that and be yourself and be authentic and show up that way is so critical for somebody's success because otherwise I'm sure that would be really internally conflicting if
Yes.
you aren't doing that, and that would just make it really rough, you
Yeah.
know? Um, so I'm gonna kind of close out with this question related to leadership development. What skills do you think leaders need to be successful in the future? There's so many things going on, but what do you think is like sort of that next phase? What are some of the key things that a leader has to have, in your opinion, that's gonna be like their success points?
Yeah. Problem solving skills is something that for a very long time I didn't have it in those words in my mind. The problem solving skills really is the key defining factor of success. In coaching school, they teach you that the person with the most behavioral adaptability or flexibility is the person who will be most successful. And then they give you a bunch of strategies to support you to do that as an individual. When you actually distill that down into something that is more corporate based, you turn that into problem solving skills. So instead of being faced with something that's a challenge, it could be maybe a team member who's going through some things, but you haven't worked that out yet, and you're just seeing the symptoms of that, which may be not in alignment with your typical team culture. It could be a big transformation the company is going through. Perhaps they're installing new software or getting a new CEO or board of directors, something like that. Instead of seeing that as just a challenge, if your problem solving skills are strong, because they are a muscle, they're a set of muscles, there's so many different ways you can approach it, you will be able to turn more and more things that might knock your team, knock their productivity, knock them emotionally, knock yourself as well, turn those scenarios into something really successful. And so more and more, I'm including problem solving skills and encouraging those to include problem solving skills, even if I'm not using those words within the program or within any sort of development, even just as a day, like development of self professionally as well. It's a really important factor. And the more we can do that, the less it matters what happens around us because we will have either the skills ourselves or the ability to develop those skills on the fly to achieve what we're looking to achieve.
I love that. I know that kind of ties into something that I have been talking about probably for the past couple of years, which is the concept of VUCA, which is the volatility, uncertainty, complexity, and ambiguity, and
Yes.
how critical it is for a leader to be able to adapt, to be flexible, to be resilient. And the problem solving skills is really one of the key components of that, like building that resilience by having problem solving skills, having critical thinking skills where you can say, I don't know all the answers now, but what do I know? Or how can I pull from an experience that has happened? Or what questions can I ask to make the best possible decision, even though I don't have all those answers and I don't know what the outcome might be or what's going to happen next? And I just think that is so critical. And I love that you selected that because if somebody says, how do you teach problem solving skills? that's difficult to do. But when you build it into everything else, like you said,
Yes.
it's not called that probably,
Yes.
but they're learning that mental agility to create that skill set. So I love that you included that. So Lindsay, I do have one more thing. I would love to know what is written on the placard behind you.
It says, and I have to turn around to read it even though it's my own sign, someone who is deeply passionate about elevating emerging leaders, also crazy cat lady.
I love both of those definitions. Those make me a big fan of yours, both reasons for that. Lindsay, thank you so much for spending some time with us today on Fully Engaged. It was great to talk to you.
Thank you so much for having me, Jennifer.
This has been Fully Engaged with Jennifer N. Sutherland. If you're interested in discovering how the art and science of leadership can combine to create exceptional workplaces, visit us at SutherlandTalentSolutions.com. Thanks for listening, and until next time, stay fully engaged.